Um, Good afternoon, good morning. Regardless of where you're calling in from, we are delighted to have you join us for this very exciting and inspiring conversation today. My name is Dr. Una Osili, Associate Dean for Research, also Dean's Fellow at the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. And I'm so honored today to welcome Julián Castro, President and CEO of the Latino Community Foundation. But before that, we also have another special and honored guest joining us, Cynthia Cardona, President of the Eli Lilly and Company Foundation. She will also provide some opening remarks and provide us with the bio of Julián Castro. So over to you, Cynthia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Una. Hello, everyone. As Una mentioned, my name is Cynthia Cardona. I serve as the president of the Eli Lilly and Company Foundation, headquartered right here in Indianapolis, not too far from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. I am very honored as well to have been invited to join you all today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome today's featured guest, Mr. Julián Castro, with whom I had the privilege of attending college as we were in the same undergraduate class. I don't know about you, Julián, but it seems like both yesterday and ages ago. So, but it certainly has been inspiring to see Julián's contributions to community over the years. And I am confident that his address today will be both enlightening and motivating for all of us. For those who may not be as familiar with Julián's background, Julián Castro serves as Chief Executive Officer of the Latino Community Foundation, the nation's largest Latino-serving foundation. Julián's deep commitment to the future of this nation is woven into his DNA. Raised by his mother, Rosy Castro, a civil rights and Chicana activist, and his grandmother, Victoria Castro, on the west side of San Antonio, Texas, Julián grew up with a profound understanding of what it meant to love and serve community. Inspired by the legacy of leaders working to safeguard our democracy and strengthen community, Julián has dedicated his life to public service. Julián was elected to the San Antonio City Council in 2001 at age 26, then was elected mayor of San Antonio in 2009. The youngest mayor of a top 50 American city at the time, Julián revitalized and transformed San Antonio into one of the country's leading economies. In 2014, President Barack Obama appointed Julián U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, where he served until the end of the Obama administration. In 2020, Julián ran for the Democratic nomination for president, and Julián earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Stanford University and a law degree from Harvard Law School. His memoir, An Unlikely Journey, Waking Up from My American Dream, was published by Little Brown in 2018. Julián is the proud father of a daughter, Karina, and a son, Cristian, and Julián's brother, Joaquin, currently represents Texas's 20th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives. In his free time, Julián loves spending time and traveling with his family. Without any further ado, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome and bienvenida to the esteemed Mr. Julián Castro. Over to you, Julián.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you again, Julián, for joining us. We have so much ground to cover, and as you can see, not a lot of time. So I'd like to just get started on our conversation. So you have served in so many roles, worn many hats, started in the city council, became the youngest mayor in the country of a top 50 city, and then served in the administration under President Obama. And now you are also in a leadership role at a very important time. As you can imagine, our audience has lots of questions, but I will start and then we'll open it up to all of our students, faculty, and community members who are joining. What leadership lessons, let's start there, can you share from your time, say, at the Obama administration, but also reaching back to being a young mayor, also young city council member, that are relevant for our time today? What lessons are you reflecting on as you go through all of the turbulent times that we're living in?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Una, for the invitation to join you. And thank you, Cynthia. It's good to see you again. Good to see a fellow Cardinal alum. Yeah, no, it's true that today we're living through, in many ways, crazy times where all of us, no matter where we find ourselves, whether it's in philanthropy or public service or in the private sector, are trying to figure out how we can make good contributions, meaningful contributions to forward progress in our local communities and in our country. For me, of course, that started as a city council member, as you mentioned, from 2001 to 2005. and then mayor of San Antonio from 2009 until 2014, and then served the last 2.5 years of the Obama administration. I took different leadership lessons along the way that have been helpful for me. First was the importance of grounding your leadership in listening to others, of understanding the aspirations, the needs of others. I tried to put that into action, especially when I was mayor of San Antonio. We launched something called SA 2020, which was a 10-year project to envision and then work toward very concrete goals that our community residents wanted to see San Antonio achieve. So on Saturday, September 25th, 2010, we launched SA 2020 with this basic question of what kind of city do you want to be on Friday, September 25th, 2020. And over the course of 6 months, thousands of San Antonians took part in forming that vision and setting specific goals in transportation, in number of housing units to be built, in educational progress, and economic development, and so forth. So I've always found that the best vision, the best leadership comes from something that's grounded in the people that you're trying to lead, whether that's community residents, it's employees, or in other contexts. The thing that I remember that I took from the Obama administration, one of the things was just the importance of the singles and the doubles, so to speak, instead of always going for the home runs, because in Washington, things are always so tied up and gridlocked that it's hard to get things like the Affordable Care Act, which was a blockbuster piece of legislation, but those things don't come around very often. But the Obama administration recognized the importance of, for instance, working with cities across the nation to help raise the minimum wage, so that all of a sudden, you may not be able to pass a higher minimum wage through Congress, get that done nationally, but Chicago and San Francisco and Seattle and Los Angeles and other cities across the country had raised their minimum wage. So all of a sudden, you have tens of millions of Americans that are living under that better reality, and it adds up. Another thing that I took from that experience was the importance of collaboration and working within the ecosystem that you're dealing in. And just really specifically, as an example, one of the things I'm proudest of from the administration was that President Obama set a goal of eliminating homelessness. Now, we have not eliminated homelessness, but his first priority was to work on veteran homelessness. And between 2010 and 2016, veteran homelessness was reduced by 47%. That happened because 19 different federal agencies worked with mayors and governors to adopt good policy at the local level, to make sure that the VA was well funded, HUD was well funded with vouchers for veterans who needed housing. And so you worked across the ecosystem and collaborated on great policy and making it a priority. And because of that push, you saw a real decline, a real reduction in veteran homelessness. Yeah, those are some of the things that I've taken so far.
Well, that's amazing. The importance of listening. That's something that really translates across sectors, whether it's public, private, or philanthropy. Also collaboration. We hear a lot about collaboration now, especially in light of all the policy shifts we're seeing in the landscape. So I think the third item that I picked up was your experience working in the grassroots ecosystem as council member, mayor, gives you such a unique perspective that a lot of folks probably don't have. And that leads me to, of course, thinking about your role now. The Latino Community Foundation is the nation's largest Latino-serving organization. And there are so many areas where today you can point to needs, whether that's education, health, basic needs, the environment, so many different priorities. At the same time, we know that Latino communities have strong traditions of giving. We just worked with Hispanics in Philanthropy a few years back on a report. I don't know if you had a chance to review it, on understanding Latinx philanthropy. unfortunately, this is not a topic a lot of people lift up. So tell us a little bit about your own experiences, maybe even growing up in philanthropy and how you are leveraging the traditions that already exist around giving in Latino communities.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. It's fair to say that the perception of Latinos and Latinas of the community often is that they're not big givers, traditional givers to nonprofits, to charity, but they actually are in different ways givers to their churches, to little neighborhood groups within their own families, right? And so they have a track record of giving, of being charitable. And I think that the opportunity that we see at the Latino Community Foundation is to translate that um, into the kind of collective action that creates greater support for nonprofits that are doing excellent work. The way we do that is that we actually manage uh, now 19 different giving circles within the state of California. We have about 400 different Latinas and Latinos who belong to these giving circles across the state. These are folks who generally give about $1,000 a year and then make decisions in their giving circle toward the end of the year about which nonprofits in their local area or some other area in the state that they want to dedicate or pool those resources for. And so far, it's the largest network of its kind of Latina and Latino philanthropists. It's doing a lot of great work. It shows that there is, I think, a lot of opportunity there in this growing community for charitable giving. And I hope, and I know, you mentioned Hispanics in philanthropy, they're another great example of one that are beginning to do giving circles. Others are doing that. And I think that if we continue to nurture that, that the Latino community is going to have such a great impact on the ability of nonprofits to do excellent work. It's especially important because so few dollars, as a percentage of the dollars that are given from mainstream philanthropy, so few dollars actually go into Latina and Latino-led organizations. We want to change that.
Wonderful. Well, I love the emphasis on starting with what the community is already doing and building on that. I think that sounds like you are already on the right track and making great progress. Now, looking ahead, as I mentioned, this is an era of a lot of opportunity, but a lot of crises, points, and challenges. Where do you see philanthropy having an opportunity to really make a difference? Certainly education. When we look at the data, we see that, of course, Latino families give to religious congregations, to education, to healthcare, to basic needs, not necessarily in that order, but from your perspective, how are you prioritizing where you're putting your efforts and how you're aligning priorities? I feel like that must be one of the toughest things you're trying to figure out right now.
Well, it is. I mean, I think it's fair to say that since January 20th, not without, any partisanship to it, but look, the policy direction of our country has changed dramatically, and several of those changes intimately impact Latinas and Latinos. I'm talking especially about issues like immigration policy. We have a tremendous number of immigrants in the community, mixed status families where the kids may be American citizens, but their parents or not. You have, of course, several 100,000 dreamers also that right now are experiencing a lot of anxiety. So at LCF, we've tried to be both proactive and then also responsive and reactive. For instance, in December, about a month after the election, we let out 6 strategic capacity grants to different immigration rights and advocacy organizations in California that are doing important work to help them prepare for all of the work that was ahead and that they're coming to see now. In fact, about 10 days ago, I went to a Know Your Rights session in Redwood City that was serving the immigrant community there just to let them know, how to respond if they're questioned about their immigration status. And you gather that there's a tremendous amount of new requests for information, people that want these sessions, the red cards, as they're called, that have people's rights like written on them and how they should respond. So we've tried to fund, efforts like those that very much have to do with the times that we're in, just putting extra dollars there. But in general, we believe in putting dollars into organizations that fundamentally are helping to make change in policy. So we invest in organizations doing civic engagement and then also economic justice and opportunity. So that ranges from organizations in a 501c3 capacity, we don't have a 501c4, that are getting out there and helping to inform voters about the issues, helping to ensure that they know where to vote and that they're registered and so forth. Did a lot of that. We've done a lot of that now for years and a lot in 2024. And then also on the economic justice and opportunity side, supporting everything from nonprofits that work with farm workers. For instance, I visited a group recently, a few months ago, called ALBA, that is turning farm workers into farm owners through a program that they have to set them up with plots of land and then help them buy their own plot of land and help them establish a market for their goods that they farm. To organizations that are working to organize tenants, farm workers, low-income workers, domestic workers, all of that.
Wow, so quite a bit going on. I definitely resonate with the idea of proactive, even giving those capacity grants last year to strategies right now that are responding to some of the challenges that communities are facing. I think that's always a tough balance to both look at that longer term view as well as addressing these short-term challenges. It sounds like you're doing both. I also really like the asset and kind of economic empowerment agenda that you've laid out, especially around a lot of the agriculture workers and helping them think about ownership. That I think is very exciting. And is there a place we can read more about this? I know we have lots of folks who are joining who would love to get more insight. So if there is, you can always share it with us afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, we're about to debut a new website, revamped website.
Perfect.
So that's a great place at latinocf.org.
Fabulous. So stay tuned for more on this call. One thing that I have been thinking a lot about as I have reflected on your journey, I think you called it an unlikely journey with growing up in San Antonio, working, of course, getting to Stanford, Harvard Law School, premier institutions, but not stopping there, coming back home, and this venture into politics, and then now in philanthropy. In some ways, this story is, of course, an American story, but as you said, also one that is very unusual. I was just thinking about a lot of our students, faculty members who are joining. What kinds of insights do you think as you reflect on your own story and the needs of Latino communities now? There are a lot of things that we are learning, especially from the data perspective. Of course, this is a very diverse community, lots of countries of origin, traditions, religious traditions, but also some commonalities. And there, I'd say one common element is the youth of the population. Families that are just starting out and so forth. So I'm going to just ask you to reflect a little bit as you put yourself in the shoes of some of our students and think about, or even young professionals that are starting in philanthropy. What are some things that you think you actually can take away from your childhood and the lessons that were imparted in you by your mom? I think even your grandmother you've talked about.
Yeah, no, my grandmother, had come from Mexico when she was 6 or 7 years old because she lost her parents and lived with her closest relatives in San Antonio. And she raised my mom as a single parent. My grandmother didn't finish even elementary school, but then my mother was able to go on and graduate from high school and graduate from college and eventually get her master's degree. And she raised my brother Joaquin and me as a single parent. And we went to the public schools of San Antonio and then were able to graduate from high school and go on to Stanford and then go on to Harvard for law school. And so I really do feel like I've lived out my dreams and am grateful to my mother and my grandmother, my father, others, and to the country for the opportunity that I've had. And when I think about our community, I think of a community that is very hardworking, a community of struggle, of a fundamentally immigrant experience that may be in the current generation, in the last generation, or like me, 2 generations ago. But this immigrant experience and of believing in the promise of America and working toward it. And when I think about the climate that we're in today, it's unfortunate because I see so much promise, continued promise in the Latino community. It's a community now that is almost 20% of the country. According to the latest census, more than a quarter of the children in our country are little Latina girls or Latino boys. And it's even more than that in the public school system in our nation, even in places like Indiana, I'm sure, but certainly in my home state of Texas and California, where I am today, it's over 50% of the public school students are from the Latinx community. So the community, I think, is one of the greatest assets that we have as our country gets older. And we see things like declining birth rates. We see a baby boomer generation that is pulling down on Social Security at an unprecedented rate. You want an enthusiastic, hardworking, young group of people to be there to carry on the promise of the country, and very much so, not exclusively, of course, but very much so, the Latino community is that. And so I'm hopeful that we can, in what we do, whether people are in public service or they're in philanthropy, find ways to support the ability of people to appreciate their differences, to work together toward progress, and for those of us in philanthropy to be nimble about filling in the gaps that too often exist, whether it's in education or other types of opportunity or healthcare. We can do that.
Wow, wonderful. You've covered a lot of ground there. And I certainly, here in Indiana, we are just really fortunate because we have a young group of, especially here in Indianapolis, young group of very dedicated, energetic leaders in the Latino community. And I have certainly benefited from working very closely and here at the school with the community. I think one of the debates that we have wrestled with, especially in light of the Understanding Latinx Philanthropy report, was that wealth creation has to be part of the equation. When we look at communities of color broadly, but especially the Latino community, we see, as we said, strong traditions of generosity, whether formally or informally, whether giving to family, neighborhood organizations, sending money to family members back home. But often one of the challenges is also that we don't emphasize as much this idea of ownership and wealth creation and financial market participation more broadly. I feel like you're already doing this at LCF with the work you described, but are there other examples where you are really leaning into this idea of giving, but also wealth creation, wealth building, and assets in the community as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's true about our community and other communities as well, but certainly Latinas and Latinos, is a very entrepreneurial group. I grew up in San Antonio that today is about 65% Latino, mostly Mexican American, but it's diversifying in terms of the Latinas and Latinos, and then overall was about 75% people of color. And I grew up in the city in the 1980s and 90s with TV commercials by folks named Ansita, and going to grocery stores that had Menchaca grocery on it, or reading a newspaper, La Prensa, that was owned by a Latino, watching television and seeing lawyers advertise their services, that Herrera and Garcia and different last names. So it was very clear, in that city, like a lot of other communities, has a strong track record of Latina and Latino entrepreneurialism. One of the things that we're doing right now at the Latino Community Foundation is supporting, through something we call the Latino Nonprofit Accelerator, the ability of CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, that serve Latina and Latino small business owners to be able to grow. That's why I'm actually in LA right now. We're having one of the sessions related to that, that helps them on being able to fundraise more effectively, to reach out into the community, works on their management of the organization and their networking ability as well, so that they can offer more access to capital. That's especially important now because some of the policy changes that are being considered in Washington would include cutting back on funding for CDFIs. A second quick example is that we're this year launching in full something that we're calling the California Procurement Playbook. We know that we're living through this era of, the end of affirmative action with the Harvard case, as well as an anti-DEI backlash. So we're working with Bruce Katz at the NOAC Metro Institute, and he has an affiliation with Drexel University in Philadelphia, to come up with the best way to proceed in this environment in terms of contracting at the local, state, and national level, so that traditionally disadvantaged businesses, including Latina and Latino-owned ones, still have a pathway to try and get contracts that they're, qualified for, that they're able to do a great job on, and be able to grow their business through that procurement process. We're excited about that as well. Both of those initiatives, I think, help create wealth in the community, and that wealth means that people's education, kids' educational outcomes, their health outcomes, their housing is going to be better, and ultimately that they're going to be giving more, giving back to the community that they live in.
Fantastic. That is very exciting. I had not heard about those, so I'm very excited about digging in further. And that point you made earlier was something we've been tracking in the data here at the Lilly Family School as well. And that is, it's coming out later this month, a report on what forms and fractions of giving go to communities of color. And in your remarks earlier, you just mentioned that disproportionate, say, to the population, a small share of overall philanthropy is targeted at Latinx led and serving nonprofits. How are you at LCF trying to change that, to elevate the profile of Latino serving nonprofits, Latino led nonprofits, so that they can receive a higher fraction of the overall philanthropic dollars available?
I would say in two ways. We're modeling that in many ways. That's the reason for being of the Latino Community Foundation. Originally, LCF was an offshoot of the United Way and the San Francisco Foundation in 1989. And then in 2016, actually became its own independent organization that's statewide in California. Over those years, we have put dollars into over 300 Latina or Latino-led nonprofits in the state, mostly doing civic engagement or economic opportunity and justice work. So we're modeling that. And the second part of that, though, is that by making an investment, we also send a signal to larger philanthropy, because LCF is small. I mean, our endowment is about $30 million. And, it's been growing significantly for the size of the organization. And my vision is to build it to become a national foundation, the community's foundation one day, but it's small. But what we can do is to send a signal to broader philanthropy that, hey, you may not have noticed these organizations in Watsonville, California, or in the Imperial Valley of California or the Bay Area, but they are doing fantastic, impactful work. And so please put them on your radar screen, let them in the door. And from there, we think that their work will speak for itself, and that they're able to then get more funding. And we've seen a number of examples of that, where LCF has been an early investor in these nonprofits. They're able to grow a bit and do great work, and then be able to tell their story and get more funding from bigger organizations. We saw like kind of a microcosm of that recently. We raised $5 million after the LA wildfires, and began to put those dollars into organizations that were serving some of the most vulnerable people, the domestic workers, the street vendors, the renters, other folks who often are at the margins. And in times of disaster, especially if they may be undocumented, for instance, are very, very hesitant to seek aid. And we put those dollars both directly into supporting families, but also into organizations that are on the ground and supporting them and doing great work. We did it very early. And I think we helped send a signal to larger foundations about who's doing impactful work, and ultimately, hopefully help get more funding for those organizations so they can expand their reach.
Fantastic. So you are serving as a catalyst, catalytic capital for those organizations, providing them with access, probably early stage, as they start to grow and then can attract larger philanthropic dollars from other entities. I think that is a really important piece. And later this month, when we launch that report, I will certainly reach out to you and your colleagues to share some of those findings. And that also leads us to another point, which I think you've touched on, how important collaboration is. One entity alone, LCF alone, cannot solve the complex problems that we have on our radar today, at our doorsteps really today. But at the same time, it involves working across. It's not just within philanthropy, but with business, with policymakers, and with nonprofits together. What are the barriers to those types of collaborative relationships, especially in the Latino community? What are the kind of constraints that you're seeing, as well as how do we overcome them?
I think different challenges that you face, when you're dealing with the community itself, right? There's a tremendous and vibrant small business environment and ownership, but really there aren't that many, by proportion of the population, there aren't that many people that own big businesses, like impactful businesses, or even folks yet that are in very high level CEO roles, right? There's still a lot of ground to make up in terms of representation at that level. And so sometimes there's a disconnect, right? And not because people necessarily wouldn't want to connect or be helpful, but just because that's not something that a lot of folks in making those decisions are familiar with. So it's creating that network, creating the connection, the familiarity, and being able to establish that. I think that sometimes that's the most important part. In addition to that, though, I think sometimes there's a lack of trust, frankly, right? Like, I come from public service. I was in politics. Sometimes I jokingly refer myself as a recovering politician. But so I know firsthand the way on both ends, right? On the political side of things, when you're in politics, you tend to focus on other public sector endeavors. Like, you're sitting on top of a budget, whether you're in Congress or you're mayor or on a city council or in the state government system. And so things get filtered oftentimes through that lens. In philanthropy, I find that sometimes folks don't want to deal with politics. They think it's a little dirty, or they're not, sure who to trust within that system. And so, or, there are rivalries among politicians, so they don't want to step into the wrong camp, so to speak. And so there's sometimes a distance that exists. I often tell folks in philanthropy, since I'm new to it, that like I can count on like within one hand the number of times when I was in public service that a philanthropy actually reached out to me directly to say, hey, like, what are you working on? Or what do you see out there that you think we should be putting dollars into or investing in? And not necessarily make a commitment just off of that, but just as kind of to brainstorm. That doesn't happen enough, those kinds of connections. So, I see my role as somebody that has now both of these backgrounds is trying to bridge some of that. And I think that's especially important for a community that's often been, on the margins and somewhat invisibilized, like the Latino community, that it's even more important there for those connections to happen.
Amazing. So you are able to really bridge these very different worlds, the political world, the philanthropic world, and bring these two forms of capital together potentially, as well as the business side, because I'm sure as mayor and then at HUD, you worked very closely with the business community. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what kinds of initiatives you're able to forge in this new role. I'm also so curious about what do you think as you look out to the future? As you mentioned that no one had asked you, or very few times in public service where you asked, what would you like to do? And philanthropists did not reach out to you. Well, now you have a whole audience full of current and future people in philanthropy. What would you say here are some opportunities that philanthropy should certainly prioritize in this moment? Philanthropists should be paying attention to from sitting in all these different seats. I think maybe your wish list for this audience, because now you have a whole room full of them.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're living in unprecedented times, and where the policy direction of the country has really changed. And I think it's fair to say, risks leaving people who are already marginalized even more marginalized. So I think the first thing is figuring out how to help ensure that we have a strong and healthy democracy, and that democracy is an inclusive one. For instance, in philanthropy right now, I know that there is among some a real anxiety about a continued commitment, whether they should continue their commitment to racial justice and equity work. And I believe now is a time to stand up for that commitment, and not back away from it. And whether that work is in organizing or in voter registration or mobilization or in educational opportunity efforts, we have a large, diverse country that is only going to get more diverse in the years to come. And if we're going to succeed as a nation, if we're going to prosper, it means that you can't leave anybody on the sidelines. America cannot succeed if the Latino community, where more than a quarter of the country are Latinas or Latino children, more than a quarter of our children, you're not going to succeed in the future if those children are not well educated and contributing members to our economy. So that's first, just standing up for those values that I think a lot of the philanthropic sector believes in, has stood up, and more than that, has put dollars into now for years. I would say, secondly, to look at where those gaps are now that are being created, for instance, in healthcare, right? Right now in Washington, D.C., there's a conversation about significantly cutting future Medicaid funding. What role does philanthropy have? And I know that many don't have the resources of the federal government, right? That's only the federal government has the kind of resources there to encompass all of this. But in local communities, where can some of those gaps be filled? And another good example of this is on immigration. I'm sure that folks watching also, are interacting with some folks in immigrant communities. There's a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety that's very real. And from basic things like know your rights sessions to legal defense work, to helping to change the longer term narrative about the value of immigrants to our country, so that we reach a kind of balance again. I think all of that is important work in the moment.
So you've given us a lot of to-dos, this audience of current and future philanthropists and those working in philanthropy. I think I am, of course, taking away so much, but first of all is recommitting ourselves to our values and understanding that we can all do something in this moment. understanding, listening, going back to what you said first, where those gaps are, where can we make a difference? But also not retreating from the work that needs to be done to build a healthy and prosperous future for our country and a vibrant democracy. You seem to be, of course, full of so many different ideas, and I can't even, it's hard to say one thing, but I'll ask you to tell us what you are most optimistic about as you reflect on the future of our country, the work you're doing at the Latino Community Foundation, and then just your experiences that you've had over the, I can only imagine the conversations you've been in. What are some things that are just giving you hope, optimism, and a sense that our future is secure even during these very turbulent times?
Yeah, but what gives me hope right now really is this younger generation of Americans that I believe is appreciative of our nation's diversity, wants to find a way to have a country that is inclusive, believes in that, as a model for the future, and is very creative, very innovative, and in many ways is opposite of some of what I see, coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. It gives me hope that I know, we come from immigrant communities where our, ancestors, whether they're our grandparents or our parents or some people today as immigrants, people have dealt with struggle their whole lives and have overcome a lot wherever they've come from, not only in the Latino community, but from all over the world, and have faced tougher times in their lives and have helped create, the country that we have today together. And that gives me a lot of hope that, this moment may be one of chaos and of darkness in some ways, and of scapegoating and other things of the most vulnerable. But we have seen times like that before, and that we can get past them, and that people have the heart to get past it.
Wonderful. So you are not, it sounds like you are staying focused on the work at hand and not getting too distracted by some of the divisiveness out there, which is fantastic. Yes.
Try not to, yeah.
That's wonderful. We have a lot of questions coming, potentially a lot of questions too that have already come in. And I'm going to encourage our audience. We have some time to open it up to everyone else to ask questions. I'll start with the first two that have come in. The first one is, first of all, congratulating LCF on the work that you and the organization have been engaged in. But this participant, audience member, wants to know what we're doing to help Latino nonprofits improve their fundraising efforts, especially fundraising from individual donors, understanding that, especially in this environment, building a diverse set of donors beyond just foundation grants, teaching, I think this listener says we need to teach them to fish and how to fish and not just working on the foundation segment. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that not only, the nonprofits, but LCF itself is we're a community foundation, so we are, so an intermediary that raises dollars and then passes them along, and then we have our own endowment and so forth. But we do help nonprofits get better at fundraising through something called the Latino Nonprofit Accelerator Initiative. And also the one that I'm here in LA for today, the Latino Capital Accelerator. The Capital Accelerator Initiative works specifically with CDFIs. The Nonprofit Accelerator Initiative works with nonprofits across the board that are doing work in, civic engagement and organizing and economic justice and opportunity. One of the main components of those programs is fundraising, and basically teaching them how to more effectively fundraise and network with the goal of amping up their fundraising ability and ultimately their budgets and their ability to do more good work. On our end, just now, let me address LCF. we, like a lot of other organizations, have recognized that, you have to diversify your fundraising base. So traditionally, LCF has depended a lot on California foundations. We're both continuing to do that and do deep work in California, but as we look at becoming a national organization, we're also reaching out and having success with national foundations. But to your question, we recognize that really we also need to build this set of high net worth individual donors, and also through our giving circles, right? There are folks that give $250 or $500 or whatever it is, a lower amount. In fact, this year we're hiring 2 development officers specifically to work on increasing our network of individual donors and non-foundation donors.
Well, it sounds like you have already anticipated this question and already working on it. Another question from a listener, an audience member, is about the difference between, of course, C3 and C4 organizations. This is more of a question: how are you safely making connections with the public sector from a legal policy perspective, understanding that some nonprofits and foundations are hesitant to have those kinds of outreach efforts because they want to perhaps mitigate risk around their C3 status. So what thoughts or advice would you give to our participants here around advocacy work?
Well, my first piece of advice is to always have compliance at the top of your mind. And I think that's especially important right now. I'm sure there are folks who are watching that are very familiar with the conversations that are happening right now in boardrooms. I sit, for instance, on the Margaret Casey Foundation board, which is a private charity with an endowment of about $900 million. And one of the distinctions between private charities and a public charity like LCF, a community foundation, is that as a public charity, you do have a little bit of leeway, of latitude on advocacy and interaction in terms of policy. So, like everybody else, we have our set of lawyers to help give us our guidance and so forth and stick to that. But I'm really happy that we do have some ability, for instance, to interact with elected officials and also put out statements on different pieces of proposed legislation or other types of policy. Also, endorsements of that, and then being able to speak to ballot initiatives, for instance, in the state of California. So, it's fair to say that, we've lived with a little bit more latitude than that. And coming from my background, I mean, that warms my heart to get to do that. But we're also still very cognizant, like, to be in compliance. That would be my number one piece of advice. Just always know where those lines are and stay within those lines.
Okay, so get the legal counsel that is needed, understand what you can and cannot do, but if you have that latitude, use the platform that you have, I think is what I'm hearing. In addition, we have another question in a slightly different direction, which is more about working with Latino donors. And what are some models that you have seen in terms of differences in stewardship, engagement, around, I think you mentioned this idea of a culture of generosity and gratitude. What are some things you've seen really be effective in working with Latino donors specifically?
And I don't think it's by any means unique to the Latino community, but I think it's true that sometimes it's even more important if you're going to be effective, which is the relationship building aspect of this. Oftentimes building those relationships takes time, it takes effort, and in addition to people believing in the cause, so to speak, it's about cultivating that relationship and connecting it to the purpose that they see, right, in the work that they do and in their lives. And I also think, right, that it does help when there's cultural resonance. I think it's important for philanthropy to be hiring and promoting people of color that are, trying to reach into different communities to fundraise. I think it does make a difference when people who are high net worth individuals, when they see their own story reflected, in the story of a program officer or development officer, when there's an easy connection there, that does make a difference. It can make a difference. I've seen that help. And yeah, so those are a couple of the thoughts that I have. I don't know that there's anything that's magically different, but it's that connection that you can create and going the extra mile on developing the relationship and then connecting it to their own story of success and what they see for the community.
Wonderful. Well, that really fits in nicely with our values here at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where we really emphasize the relationships and building trust, especially when working with diverse communities. This comment is one that I have to share with you. It's not a question, just someone who wrote to say they're just so proud of the work you're doing as someone from San Antonio and also Chicano, and just wanted to congratulate you on all the incredible work. So I thought I'd have to definitely share that. And then another question here, and we'll try to get as many in as we can, is also around this question of elevating the profile of Latino communities. Can you speak to the support that LCF can provide to local community foundations, any partnership opportunities? In other words, can we have this more national effort to elevate Latino philanthropy, both nationally and at the local level?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we hope to be, a strong part of that. And I give credit to folks like Hispanics in Philanthropy that are also doing some great work and have a presence in different parts of the country right now. There's a lot of work to do. I think, yes, that there are connections and collaboration to be made with community foundations across the country in different states that are serving populations, like communities that have a lot of Latinas and Latinos. We anticipate doing that. I'll give you an example of that. For instance, we started our kind of toe in the water with outside of California last year with putting some civic engagement money into Arizona and Nevada, our two neighboring states, and reached out to organizations like the Arizona Community Foundation and others. I think trying to figure out ways that we can work together, like benefits the community and strengthens both of these organizations. I also think that there's a wonderful opportunity, especially in states that have a lot of Latinos, but don't have much infrastructure at all. I'll give you an example of that. Like I think of North Carolina. And I don't know what the situation is in Indiana. I know that there's a growing community there. And so this may be the case or it may not be. But there's like a real hunger, right, among people and among organizations for connection and for community foundations or others that can help to provide the infrastructure for people to start having the resources to mobilize, organize, and to help improve their communities. The Latino Community Foundation wants to be a part of that in states like that, where I just see a lot of opportunity. This year, before the end of the year, we're going to have gone through a strategic planning effort to come up with our blueprint for the next 5 to 10 years. And so we're going to ask all of those questions of ourselves of, okay, well, how do we intentionally grow? What kind of connections do we need to make? How should we be working with other organizations, supporting them? And then what efforts can support our growth too, as an organization? And so we're right about to go through really deep thinking and making choices on all of that. And, would love to answer that question a year from now, really. And see what we come up with.
It sounds like we'll have to invite you back a year from now to give us an update on many of those initiatives. There are a few more questions. I'm going to try to bring them all together. One is really, how can organizations work across what are typically lines of difference. So specifically Black and Latino organizations, how can we combine some of those efforts in communities? Often we tend to see groups doing things perhaps in silos. So there's one question about promoting the work that we saw a lot of that during COVID, some collaboration across communities. And then there's also a question around organizations that are working in Central and South America, given some of the cuts in government funding and other policy shifts with international work. What can be done to support some of those organizations?
Yeah, and I'll start with that part. LCF has been mostly a California foundation, and we're beginning to go national, but the question's been asked, well, what about Mexico? What about the rest of Latin America? And I do think that there's a role, for collaboration. That's probably years into the future for LCF, frankly, but I know there are other organizations that are doing work already, right? Hispanics in Philanthropy is a good example of this. They're doing some work in Mexico, and I think maybe other parts of Latin America, to help understand what the needs are in other communities and to help drive investment to organizations that are doing great work. A few months ago, I traveled to the border to San Diego and to Tijuana to get a look at the work of one of our grantees that works across the border with migrants to make sure that they're safe, that they have what they need while they're waiting at that time for their appointments to seek asylum. All of that's been scrambled now, but it made us really think about what the opportunities are in the future to be supportive of efforts across the border and then in other countries. And so my advice there would be, to encourage organizations that are doing good work here and ask them those questions, and to create the connections also to the policymakers that help deliver resources to those countries, right? Because oftentimes there is a role for nonprofits to play there, but a lot of that comes out of Washington when it comes to resources from the United States. As to the first question, the Latino Community Foundation, has a proud history, before I got to LCF and then now, of working to help create a multiracial democracy and modeling that. So, for instance, we have been a part of supporting an effort along with the Black Freedom Fund to support reparations in California, the legislation that dealt with that. We recently, when we allocated resources for the LA wildfire response, allocated resources to other communities of color, to their nonprofit organizations that are doing great work as a way of showing solidarity and, living our values and saying that we know, this is not only about the Latino community, it's about every community that's been impacted. And then as many philanthropic executives do, I sit as part of different organizing efforts or tables that think through how we can work better and collaborate across, racial and ethnic and other groups. And, I'm proud of that work.
Wow. Well, there are so many more questions that we could ask, and you would answer so eloquently. You have so much wisdom, leadership, courage, and vision. We are, of course, thrilled that you are in the role that you are in right now at this time in our history, and also really looking forward to opportunities to work with you in the future and so many of the initiatives you've described. So from all of us here at the Lilly Family School and beyond, thank you for joining us. And we will plan to invite you back so you can share some updates with us, maybe in person in the future. So once again, thank you. Thank you to our audience, everyone who's joined. A special thank you to my colleague, LaKoya Garner, who organized, and Faith Hawkins as well. And Cynthia, I don't know if you want to come back and just give us a final greeting, if you're still available. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Una. No, thank you so much again for the opportunity to join you here, Julián. Wonderful, wonderful remarks, very inspiring, as noted. So I really appreciate the opportunity and thank you all. Yeah, look
Thank
forward.
you all. Thank you
Take
very
care.
much.